All right, so we're diving into UK energy regulations today.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it is actually, you sent over a ton of research on how they set electricity transmission and distribution charges. There's stuff straight from Ofgem in there.
Wow.
Yeah, and some internal Q&A discussions too.
Very cool.
I know you're really interested in how those TNUoS and DUoS charges work.
Yeah, definitely.
And how the costs are split between the generators and the people actually using the electricity. It's pretty complex stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what we're here for.
Right.
To try to unpack it all.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with TNUoS and DUoS.
Okay.
They sound pretty similar, but what's the main difference?
Yeah, they are similar.
Yeah.
But they work on different scales.
Okay.
So TNUoS is focused on the national transmission network.
Okay.
So those high voltage power lines going all over the country.
Right.
And it uses a fixed cost ratio to divide costs between the generators and consumers, which means there's like a predetermined total charge.
Okay.
DUoS is different. It zooms in on the local distribution networks.
All right.
So those lower voltage lines that deliver power to like your neighborhood.
Okay.
And this is where it gets kind of interesting.
Okay.
DUoS sets the charges per unit of electricity that's used. So the final bill depends on how much you actually use.
So TNUoS is like a fixed subscription fee, and DUoS is more like my mobile phone bill.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Okay, cool.
Now, within DUoS, there's actually two more acronyms that we need to talk about.
Oh, great.
EDCM and CDCM.
Okay.
So EDCM kicks in for connections that are above 22 kilovolts.
Okay.
So that's dealing with larger industrial sites businesses. CDCM covers everyone else, the lower voltage connections below 22 kilovolts.
So EDCM is for the big energy users.
Right.
And then CDCM is for like me.
Exactly.
And
EDCM calculates charges individually for each site
wow.
based on their needs, their usage pattern.
So very granular.
Very granular, yeah. And CDCM lumps customers into broader categories
Okay.
and applies standard tariffs.
Okay. Makes sense.
It's more about streamlining it for the majority of users.
Right. Okay. I see how that would make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm starting to get how this all kind of fits together.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the voltage levels, though, right?
Oh, you're right.
These models also determine how much of the cost is fixed versus how much depends on my usage.
Exactly.
Right.
CDCM uses what are called standing charge factors.
Okay.
And these determine the balance between the fixed charges and those that change based on how much electricity you use.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So there's another piece to this.
Yes.
Those generators that don't produce electricity constantly.
Yes, the intermittent generator.
Right, like wind and solar.
Exactly.
How do they fit into all this?
Yes, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's been a big area of change.
Okay.
Initially, both TNUoS and DUoS, specifically the CDCM model, handled them differently.
Okay.
TNUoS realized that intermittent generators, their output goes up and down.
Yeah, of course.
So they set lower per kilowatt unit rates to compensate for that.
Okay, so wind and solar get a lower rate because they're not always producing power.
Exactly. Because their capacity factor is lower, they pay less per unit.
Oh, so it's kind of like a volume discount because they're not as consistent?
Yeah, you could think about it that way.
Okay.
Now on the DUoS side,
Yeah.
things were really interesting.
Okay.
Before 2021, CDCM actually had different rates for intermittent generators and non-intermittent generators.
Wow.
So like fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And some people argued that this gave non-intermittent sources an advantage.
Okay.
Then in 2021, there was a big shift.
Okay.
The DUoS tariffs stopped distinguishing between the two.
So now everybody pays the same rate.
Everyone pays the same rate.
Interesting. Why'd they change it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Really?
The research doesn't actually say why they made that change. It's kind of a mystery.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind when you're reading those documents.
A real cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Okay, back to EDCM for a minute.
Okay.
We know it's site-specific.
Yeah.
But what kind of charges are we actually talking about?
So it's like a multi-part tariff.
Okay.
You have a unit charge, which is the cost for every unit of electricity that you use.
Okay.
And then there's a fixed charge, which doesn't depend on how much you use.
Okay.
And that covers like the sunk costs of maintaining the network.
So even if I use zero electricity, I still got to pay that fixed charge.
That's right.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
There's a capacity charge,
Okay.
which is based on the maximum amount of electricity that you might need from the network.
Okay.
Higher voltage connections usually have higher capacity charges.
Okay.
And then there's an exceeded capacity charge.
What's that?
It's a penalty if you underestimate how much capacity you need.
Oh, so it's like going over my data limit on my phone
Exactly.
and then getting hit with a fee.
Yep.
Got it.
Uh,
I did notice something in the EDCM model. That seemed a little bit strange.
what's that?
Some sites have a unit charge of 0.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't seem very cost reflective.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
My guess is it only applies to a certain time band
Okay.
called the super red unit charge,
Okay.
which I think is during times when demand is super high.
Oh, so maybe it's not that those sites get free electricity,
Right.
but maybe it's something about how costs are allocated during those super high demand times.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
It's definitely worth looking into more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's easy to get lost in all these details.
Yeah.
But we got to keep the big picture in mind, right?
Yeah, of course.
What are these systems actually trying to achieve?
Right. They're not just making this stuff up.
No.
There's got to be like a reason for it.
Exactly. One of the main goals is to make sure the whole electricity network is financially sustainable.
Okay.
So these charges are what cover the cost of like building and maintaining and upgrading everything.
Yeah.
From those huge transmission towers
Right.
to those little distribution lines that go to our houses.
So it's like paying taxes for roads and bridges, but for the electricity grid.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
Another important goal is to get people to use the network efficiently.
Okay.
Remember how DEoS charges are based on how much you use?
Yeah.
Well, that's like a direct incentive for people to think about how much electricity they're using,
Oh, cool.
which can help reduce peak demand.
It makes you think twice about running the dishwasher when electricity is expensive.
Exactly.
Okay.
If we can spread out demand over the whole day, then we can maybe avoid having to do expensive upgrades to the network.
Right.
Yeah.
And those time of day unit
Yeah.
charges, the red, amber, green stuff,
Yeah,
that's all about encouraging us to use energy during off-peak times, right?
absolutely. It's all about making sure the price reflects the actual cost of providing electricity at different times.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got sustainability,
Mhm.
efficiency.
Yeah,
But what about fairness?
right.
How do these systems make sure the costs are split fairly?
Well, that's where things get a little more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
As we've seen, there's some debate about what generators pay versus what consumers pay,
Yeah.
especially for the distribution costs.
It seems like consumers are paying a lot more for the distribution costs.
Yeah.
They are? Is that something Ofgem is trying to change?
Yeah, they are.
Let
They've
them
been
go.
talking about adding like site-specific charges for generators that are connected to the distribution network.
Okay.
So they might shift some of the costs based on how much impact the generator has.
So like if there's a big factory that uses a ton of electricity,
Yeah.
they'd have to pay more.
Exactly. It's all about making sure the charges reflect the actual impact on the network.
Right.
Which brings us back to those EDCM charges.
Yeah.
It seems like that's kind of a step towards that more granular impact-based approach.
Right.
Yeah, by making the charges specific to each site, EDCM is trying to capture the real costs of serving that user. But we can't forget about those weird things we found.
Yeah.
Like sites that have a 0-unit charge sometimes.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it's really all about costs or if there's something else going on.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's what makes this so interesting.
Yeah.
Those intermittent generators.
Mm.
It's been interesting to see how the approach has changed over time.
Yeah, definitely.
Initially, there was a lot of concern about how those sources like wind and solar would affect the stability of the grid.
Right, because they're not always on.
Right. Some people said they were getting a free ride.
Really?
Yeah, because the infrastructure was built for traditional power plants.
And wind and solar might still need those coal or gas plants to back them up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as renewables become more common, the focus has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
People realize they're really important for getting rid of carbon in the electricity sector.
So now instead of being penalized for being variable,
Yeah.
the system is trying to find ways to integrate them fairly.
Right?
That's good.
And we can see that in the TNUoS charges.
Mm-hmm.
They give lower unit rates to intermittent generators.
Okay.
It's a way to acknowledge that they're not perfect,
Yeah.
but also appreciate the fact that they're helping us get cleaner energy.
That's cool. So what about that change in DUoS charges in 2021?
Yeah.
They went from having different rates for intermittent and non-intermittent generators to just one rate for everyone.
Yeah, it was a pretty big change.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's really interesting. Was it just to make things simpler
Mm,
or to really push for renewable energy
right.
or maybe to address those concerns about how costs are shared between different types of generators?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the research doesn't say why they did it.
Oh, wow. So we don't really know.
You don't know for sure.
It's like a missing piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just shows that even with all this research, there are still things we don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this so interesting. It's not just about reading stuff. It's about trying to understand why things are the way they are.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so let's go back to EDCM and CDCM.
Okay.
We know that EDCM is custom made for big users.
Yeah.
But CDCM takes a more standard approach, right?
Right.
Grouping customers into different categories.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those categories and how they decide what charges people pay?
Sure. Think about all the different people that use electricity.
Yeah.
Homes, small businesses, giant factories, even people generating their own power and sending it back to the grid.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. CDCM tries to group those users into categories based on things they have in common.
Okay.
Things like the voltage level, how much they use, and the type of connection they have.
So it's like sorting your laundry.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
You got to separate the delicates,
Yeah.
but with electricity customers.
Exactly. One category is domestic aggregated. That covers most homes.
Yeah.
The people who don't really think about kilowatts when they turn on a light.
All right, we just want to make sure the coffee works in the morning.
Exactly. Most homes don't have those fancy meters that track energy use in real time.
Yeah.
So they get charged using a simpler system.
Makes sense to keep it simple.
Yeah, it does, but things get more complicated for businesses and industrial users.
Okay.
They often have better meters, and their energy use changes a lot.
Right, like factories might run machines at certain times.
Yeah.
Or some businesses might use more energy depending on the season.
Exactly. So CDCM has categories like LV industrial or HV commercial to account for those differences.
Okay.
And remember those standing charge factors?
Yeah.
They help decide the balance between fixed charges and charges based on usage for each category.
So it's like each category has its own formula for the electricity bill?
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Now, there's another interesting category, LV generation aggregated.
What's that?
That covers the smaller generators that are connected to the lower voltage distribution network.
Okay.
So things like solar panels on your roof or small wind turbines.
So people who are making their own power
Yeah,
and sometimes sending it back to the grid.
exactly. They need to be paid for that electricity they're giving back.
Right.
But they also might need to use power from the grid when they're not generating enough.
So it goes both ways.
Yes, their tariff is designed to account for that.
Like a two-way street for electricity.
Exactly.
Cool.
And the way CDCM handles those smaller generators is changing all the time as we get more distributed energy resources.
It sounds like they're trying to keep up with all the new stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
So we've been talking a lot about CDCM,
Yeah,
but what about EDCM?
right.
It handles the bigger users,
Yeah.
connected at higher voltages. It's
Mhm.
totally different, right?
Yes, it calculates charges for each site individually.
Oh, wow. So no more ready to wear. It's all custom made.
That's right. Each site gets its own charges based on things like where they connect their voltage, how much capacity they need, and how much electricity they use.
Okay, and that's where those multiple charges come in. Unit charges, fixed charges, capacity charges, even those exceeded capacity charges. It's all part of creating a unique bill for each site.
Exactly.
Wow.
People say EDCM is more cost-reflective than CDCM because it really tries to connect the charges to how much it costs to serve each user.
Right, so you're paying for what you use,
Yeah,
plus your share of the infrastructure costs.
exactly.
It makes sense.
It does seem simpler.
Yeah.
But remember, even with EDCM, we saw those weird things like sites with a 0-unit charge.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if the model really always captures the costs or if something else is going on.
Another mystery to solve.
Okay.
It seems like every time we peel back a layer, there's another layer underneath.
That's right.
It's like an onion of UK energy regulation.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
It's what makes this so interesting.
Yeah, it is.
It's a super complex system that's always changing, and understanding how it works helps us really appreciate the challenges and opportunities in the UK energy sector.
And it reminds us that even these boring regulations actually have a big impact on our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
It affects how much we pay for electricity
Mm-hmm.
and even how we transition to cleaner energy.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about cost reflectivity.
Okay.
It sounds fancy,
Yeah.
but it's really just about making sure people pay their fair share, right?
Yeah, that's the basic idea. It's about matching charges with the actual costs.
Okay,
So the people who use more or cause higher costs should pay more.
right. So if a new wind farm needs a big upgrade to the transmission network,
Yeah,
they shouldn't get a free pass,
exactly.
right?
TNUoS tries to do this with its locational charges.
Okay.
Remember, those charges are different depending on where a generator or consumer connects to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
So generators in areas with high transmission costs usually pay more.
So it's like real estate.
Yeah,
You pay more for a better location.
exactly.
And here you're paying more for a better spot on the grid.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
But TNUoS knows that not all costs are covered by those locational charges.
Right.
That's where the residual charge comes in.
Look at that.
It covers the leftover costs that aren't about location.
So it's like a shared cost that everyone pays.
Yeah, it's for the things that benefit everyone on the network.
Okay.
DUoS has a harder time with this cost reflectivity thing.
Okay.
It's dealing with the distribution network,
Right.
which is
Right.
way more complex and localized than the transmission network.
Right. So it's like comparing the cost of delivering a package to each house on a street
Yeah.
versus just getting it to the post office.
Exactly. One is much more detailed than the other. And because DUoS covers so many different users
Mm-hmm.
with all kinds of needs and usage patterns,
Right.
it's really hard to figure out how to split the costs fairly.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where those customer categories and standardized tariffs come in.
Right.
They're trying to simplify things and make it at least somewhat fair.
But is it actually working?
Well, that's what people are debating right now.
Okay.
Some people are worried that those categories don't really reflect the true cost of serving each user.
Yeah.
And remember how consumers are paying most of the distribution costs?
Yeah.
That raises some questions about whether it's really fair.
Especially with all these new smaller generators coming online.
Right.
They're using the network too.
Yeah.
So shouldn't they pay their share?
That's a big debate right now.
Okay.
And Ofgem is trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Remember, they're thinking about adding those site-specific charges for generators on the distribution network.
Mm-hmm.
That could shift some of the costs based on the generator's impact.
So maybe solar panels that reduce the need for upgrades would get a credit,
Yeah,
and a big factory that puts a strain on the lines would pay more.
exactly. It's all about making a system that really reflects who's causing the costs and who's helping.
And hopefully encourages people to do things that make the grid more efficient and sustainable.
Exactly.
Okay, but wouldn't that discourage people from installing solar panels and stuff?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If it suddenly costs more, people might not do it.
That's true. It's a tricky balance.
Yeah.
We want everyone to pay their fair share,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't want to stop people from using those technologies that will help us get cleaner energy.
Right. It's like encouraging people to shop local
Yeah,
and then suddenly making all the local stores more expensive.
you're getting it.
Okay.
It's complicated. There are good arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
The important thing is that things are changing
Yeah.
and the regulators are trying to keep up.
Trying to create a charging system that's fair and efficient
Mm-hmm.
and helps us move towards cleaner energy.
Exactly.
It's a lot.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about how TNUoS handles those embedded generators,
Okay.
the ones connected to the distribution network instead of directly to the transmission network,
Right.
like the rooftop solar and small wind turbines we were talking about before.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in the past, these generators actually got a rebate under TNUoS.
Really?
It was called the embedded benefit.
So they got money back?
Yeah. From the transmission system operator.
Why was that?
Well, the thinking was that they were helping to reduce the need for transmission network upgrades
Okay.
because they were making electricity closer to where people were using it.
So it's like getting rewarded for shopping local.
Exactly.
But then as we got more and more embedded generators,
Mm-hmm.
it started to cause problems. What
Yeah.
kind of problems?
Well, some people said that the embedded benefit was getting too big,
Okay.
that it was distorting the market
Okay.
and giving embedded generators an unfair advantage over bigger generators that are directly connected to the transmission network.
Also, it's like getting an unlimited discount at your favorite store.
Yeah,
Well, everyone else has to pay full price.
that's a good analogy.
Okay.
There were also concerns that the embedded benefit wasn't really reflecting the actual costs and benefits.
Okay.
Like, it wasn't considering the impact on the local distribution networks.
Right, because even though they're not directly connected to the transmission network,
Mm-hmm.
they're still using those distribution lines to get their electricity to people.
Exactly.
Okay.
And those distribution networks might need upgrades to handle all that new generation.
Right, so it's like building a new on-ramp to a highway,
Yeah,
but then realizing you need to widen the local roads to handle all the extra traffic.
exactly.
Gotcha.
So Ofgem decided to change things.
Okay.
They got rid of the embedded benefit for these smaller generators.
So no more discount.
No more automatic rebate.
Okay.
They're treated more like the bigger generators now.
Okay.
They pay charges based on their location and how much electricity they send to the grid.
So it's more fair now.
That was the idea. But of course, people are debating this too.
Of course.
Some people say it's unfair to embedded generators, and then it might stop people from using these distributed resources.
Right, so it's like encouraging people to shop local
Yeah.
and then raising the prices at all the local stores.
You got it.
Okay.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that the energy landscape is changing. And the regulators are trying to figure out how to create a charging system that works for everyone.
A system that's fair and efficient.
Yeah,
And that helps us move towards cleaner energy.
exactly.
Okay.
Now, we've talked a lot about the charges for generators.
Yeah.
But what about the people who are actually using the electricity?
Right. How are TNUoS and DUoS charges decided for them?
Yeah, how does all this affect our electricity bills? That's a great question.
Yeah.
TNUoS and DUoS are designed to get the money for the network from both sides.
Okay.
The people making the electricity and the people using it.
So we're all paying to keep the lights on.
Exactly. For TNUoS, the charges for consumers are also based on location.
Okay.
So people in areas with higher transmission costs will usually pay more.
Just like with generators.
Right.
It's all about location.
Yeah, location is key.
Got it.
Remember those two parts of the locational charge?
Mm-hmm.
The peak security charge
Yeah.
and the year-round charge?
Yeah.
The peak security charge is all about making sure the network can handle those times when everyone needs electricity.
So
Like those hot summer days when everyone's using their AC.
it's like paying extra for a guaranteed seat on a crowded flight.
Yeah.
You're paying for the peace of mind knowing you'll have electricity when you really need it.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
The year-round charge covers the basic cost of keeping the transmission network running all year long.
That's like the base fare for electricity service.
Exactly.
Okay.
And just like with generators, TNUoS also has that residual charge for consumers.
Right.
It covers the rest of the costs that aren't about location.
So it's like a service fee in your bank account.
Yeah. Okay. Now for DUoS, the charges for consumers are calculated using either CDCM or EDCM, depending on their voltage level and usage.
Right. EDCM is for the bigger users with those custom charges.
Yeah,
And CDCM puts people into categories with those standardized tariffs.
exactly.
Right.
In the past, DUoS charges for consumers were mostly based on how much electricity they used.
Okay, so use more pay.
Right. But people are starting to wonder if that's really the fairest way to do it.
Really? Why?
Well, some people think that just looking at consumption isn't always fair or efficient,
Okay, why not?
because even if you don't use a lot of electricity,
Mm-hmm.
you're still benefiting from having a reliable connection to the grid.
Right.
And some people, like those with big houses or appliances that use a lot of energy,
Yeah.
they might have a bigger impact on the network,
Okay.
even if they don't use a ton of electricity overall.
So it's like having a big SUV that you only drive a little bit.
Yeah,
You're still taking up space on the road, even if you're not using much gas.
exactly. So to fix this, there's been a push to increase the fixed charges within DUoS.
Okay, so even if I barely use any electricity,
Yeah,
I'd still pay a base amount just to cover my share of the network.
that's right.
Okay, but hasn't that been controversial?
Yeah,
I've heard that it could be bad for low-income households.
you're right. It's tough.
Yeah.
On the one hand, fixed charges help keep the network financially stable,
Right.
but they might make things harder for people who can't afford to pay a lot.
So it's like a membership fee for a club you don't use very often.
Yeah.
It's okay if you're there all the time,
Yeah.
but if you only go once in a while, it feels like a waste.
Exactly. That's why this whole debate about fixed charges is important. It's about finding the right balance
Yeah.
to make sure these charges are fair and help everyone,
Okay.
and that they contribute to a fair energy transition.
Right, so we can't just look at the numbers.
No.
We have to think about the bigger picture
Exactly.
and how it affects people and the economy.
It's energy policy isn't just about electricity.
Right.
It's about people.
Yeah.
And making sure everyone has access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot today,
Yeah.
from the details of TNUoS and DUoS to the bigger ideas of cost reflectivity and fairness, and how it all affects generators and consumers.
Definitely.
We've seen how dynamic these regulations are.
Yeah.
They're always changing.
To keep up with all the new stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to talk about competition.
Right?
How does that fit into all this?
Yeah, competition is really important. The UK electricity market is designed to be competitive.
Okay.
So you have multiple companies trying to generate, transmit, and supply electricity.
So it's not just one big company controlling everything.
Exactly. In a competitive market, companies have to keep costs low
Okay.
and offer good prices to get customers.
So it's like choosing between different phone plans.
Yeah.
Or internet providers.
Right.
You shop around for the best deal.
That's the idea.
Okay.
But the electricity market is a little different because it's what we call a network industry.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means that it needs this big, complex infrastructure.
Yeah.
The transmission and distribution networks.
Yes.
And those are essential for getting electricity to everyone.
Right.
And these networks are often what we call natural monopolies.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means it doesn't make sense to have multiple sets of power lines everywhere.
Okay.
It would be really impractical.
Yeah, I could see that.
So it's like having just one water company or gas company in your area.
Right.
There's no real competition for those essential services.
Right, back there.
That's where regulation comes in. Ofgem's job is to make sure those network companies,
Yeah.
even though they're monopolies, they're operating efficiently and not taking advantage of their power.
So they're like referees, making sure everyone plays by the rules.
Exactly.
And that the customers aren't getting ripped off.
You got it.
Okay.
And that's where those charging systems we've been talking about come in.
Right.
They're not just about covering costs.
Okay.
They're also about encouraging those companies to operate efficiently
Okay.
and making sure everyone has a fair chance,
Right.
whether you're a generator or a supplier.
So it's about balancing competition with the fact that some things just had to be monopolies.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not easy.
I bet.
You have to think about how the market works, how technology is changing, and what the goals of the policies are.
Sounds complicated.
It is.
So the regulators have a tough job.
They do. But the UK has been pretty good at reforming its energy market.
That's good.
As things keep changing, we can expect Ofgem to keep updating those charging systems to make sure we have a fair, efficient, and sustainable electricity sector.
So competition is important, but it's not that simple.
No.
We need the market and the regulations to work together.
Exactly.
Okay.
Keep that in mind when you're reading those Ofgem documents.
Yeah.
Think about how those charges are affecting competition. Are they encouraging new ideas?
Yeah.
And are they making sure consumers are getting the benefits of a competitive electricity market?
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
And it seems like every time we find an answer,
Yeah.
it just leads to more questions. Yeah.
That's right. That's what's great about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not about having all the answers. It's about getting curious.
Yeah.
And learning more about how the world works.
I like that. It's electrifying.
Good one. Okay. Now, let's talk about something that's been changing a lot lately.
Okay.
How all this is being affected by the move towards a more sustainable energy system.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
We can't ignore it.
No, we can't.
It seems like the whole energy world is changing.
It is. And that change is having a big impact on those charges we've been talking about.
Right.
Those old charging systems were designed for a world with big power plants, weren't they?
You're talking about those massive coal and nuclear plants.
Yeah.
Usually far away from where people live.
Exactly. They need those big transmission networks to get their electricity to us.
Right. Those long-distance, high-voltage power lines.
Yeah.
It's like arteries carrying electricity from the heart to the body.
Exactly. And those old charging systems were made to cover the cost of those arteries without really thinking about other ways to get electricity. But now with renewables like wind and solar, they're popping up closer to where we live and work. And that's changing how electricity flows on the grid.
Right. It's not just going from big power plant to consumer anymore.
Right.
Now it's flowing in all directions.
Yeah.
From rooftops, wind farms, even between communities.
Exactly. It's like the energy system is growing new capillaries.
Wow.
Carrying electricity in a more local way.
That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah. And that makes things tricky for those old charging systems.
Oh, right.
They weren't designed for this.
It's not just about getting electricity from A to B anymore.
No.
It's about managing a whole network where electricity can come from anywhere.
Exactly. That's why people are so interested in new charging models that can handle all these new distributed energy resources. We need models that embrace how flexible and responsive renewables are.
So like those site-specific EDCM charges?
Yeah.
They seem like they could work for this.
They could. And people are talking about even more innovative models.
Right.
Like time of use pricing or dynamic pricing.
What's that?
Those models take into account how much renewable energy is being made and how much electricity people are demanding.
Okay.
So instead of paying the same price all the time, the price would go up and down.
Really?
Based on the time of day.
Wow.
Or even what's happening on the grid right now.
Wouldn't that be confusing for people?
It would take some getting used to.
Yeah.
But it could have big benefits.
Yeah.
The idea is to send price signals that encourage people to use energy when it's cheaper.
Okay.
Or when there's a lot of renewable energy available.
So you might get a discount for doing laundry at night.
Yeah.
When there's no solar power.
Exactly. Or for charging your car when it's windy.
Okay, that's cool.
Those price signals could help us add more renewable energy to the system, avoid those expensive upgrades, and even lower costs for people who are willing to be flexible.
Wow. So we're using the price of electricity to make sure supply and demand are balanced.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
It is, and that's what's so great about this transition. It's not just about changing how we make electricity. It's pretty amazing to see how these charging systems are adapting to accommodate all this renewable energy.
Yeah, it is.
But it takes time.
Yeah.
What are some of the big hurdles that need to be overcome to really make these systems work for a more sustainable future?
That's a good question.
One of the biggest challenges is data.
Okay.
To really manage a grid with lots of distributed energy resources, we need up-to-date information on how much electricity is being generated and how much is being used.
Okay.
That means investing in smart grid technologies and getting good at analyzing all that data.
So it's like upgrading from a paper map to a fancy GPS.
Exactly. We need real-time data to make smart decisions.
Okay.
Regulatory flexibility. Those traditional charging systems like TNUoS and DUoS, they were made for a different world.
Right.
They need to be updated.
Okay.
To better reflect the costs and benefits of distributed generation.
Right.
And to encourage the right kind of behavior for a more sustainable energy system.
So things like more dynamic pricing models, time of use tariffs, maybe even location-specific charges for those smaller generators.
Exactly. But changing regulations is tricky.
Yeah.
You have to think about how it affects everyone.
Right.
Generators, consumers, network operators.
It's like a big puzzle.
It is. You can't change one piece without affecting the whole thing.
Okay, what else?
Consumer engagement. To make the most of this new dynamic grid, people need to be involved.
So it's not just about putting solar panels on my roof.
Right.
I need to think about when I'm using electricity and maybe even get those smart appliances that can adjust automatically.
Exactly. But to get people involved, we need to make things clear and easy. We need technology that's easy to use, and we need to give people incentives.
Right, to make it worth their while.
It's all about making it easy for people to live more sustainably.
Okay, I get it.
And education is key.
Okay.
People need to understand how these new charging models work.
Yeah.
And how they can benefit from participating in this new energy system.
So we're not just changing the technology.
No.
We're changing how people think about energy.
Exactly. You've been doing all this research on UK energy regulations.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, one of the biggest things for me is just how complex it all is.
It is.
It's like looking inside a watch.
Yeah.
With all those tiny gears and springs. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
But it also makes it clear that you need experts to help you figure it out.
For sure.
I'm also surprised by how much everything is changing. It's not just staying the same.
No.
It's constantly evolving.
Right.
To keep up with new technologies, new policies, and the need for sustainability.
Those are great insights.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the details.
All right.
It's about seeing how all these different forces are shaping the future of energy.
And I think the most important thing for me is realizing that these regulations aren't just theoretical. They actually affect everyone.
Yeah.
From how much we pay for electricity
to
how quickly we can transition to cleaner energy.
You're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things.
Yeah.
To ask questions and be part of the conversation.
This deep dive has been amazing.
Yeah.
I have a much better understanding of the UK energy system now.
I'm glad to hear that.
And I'm excited to see what happens next.
Me too. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, this is just the beginning, though.
It is.
There's so much more to learn.
Yeah. Keep exploring and see what you discover.
Okay, I will. Thanks for all your help.
Anytime. And remember, keep those mental circuits buzzing.
I will.